So you will have awoken this morning to the dreadful news, front page of the Times, warn us before jabs go to Britain, EU tells Pfizer. Basically, in a fit of pique, the European Union has decided that they're getting so few vaccines and they're managing to roll out so few vaccines because they didn't organise themselves as well as this government in this country did, with Boris Johnson at the helm and Matt Hancock. You know, we've given them plenty of hard times for not doing things right. What they have got right is the vaccine rollout, and we should be very, very happy that we've got Boris Johnson in charge of this country and not the European Union, because if we had, we wouldn't be getting as many vaccines out there as we have done. We wouldn't be hitting the targets of 6 million, 7 million, 8 million as they're going to be going. And instead, we'd be sitting around waiting for the EU to kind of grant us the drippings from the rich man's table. Absolutely extraordinary. So, as far as the EU is concerned, they are putting lives ahead of anything else, so that they're saying, you know, it doesn't really matter if you don't get vaccines. We are telling you that we may block the export of certain vaccines from the European Union into Britain. If you want to save lives, that's tough. Marvellous. What a great message. Let's talk to Brendan Chilton, CEO of the Independent Business Network. Brendan, a very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. Thanks for having me on.
Not at all. I mean, I don't think I'm over-egging the pudding here to suggest that the EU is really proving itself to be a pretty nasty neighbour.
Well, absolutely. And even The Guardian have taken a critical tone this morning, so it must be true. I mean, it really is quite extraordinary. And it actually demonstrates what the benefits of having a nation state are in charge of our vaccine rollout rather than a supranational organisation. It's too big, it's too bloated, it can't adapt and respond to individual nations' needs. And so what's it doing? It's blocking, it's being protectionist. And this is exactly why the United Kingdom decided to leave. Now, I'm no fan of the government, as I'm sure you could appreciate. I'm a Labour member.
Yes.
But actually, to be fair to them, they've rolled the vaccine out. And we've got one of the highest vaccination rates, not just in Europe, but in the whole of the world. My dear old grandmother had it the other week, so I'm delighted it's being rolled out. But it just shows us we were right last year, and we should never rejoin the bloc.
No, absolutely. And this is, you know, as they say in sort of philosophical circles, you don't really find out what people are really like until you're in a bit of a crisis with them and you see how they behave. And if this is how they're going to behave, when they talk about, for example, rolling out the vaccine fairly, but then in the same breath they talk about vaccine nationalism, it's almost as if they've got this kind of obsession with individual countries, and the problem being individual countries, when they don't actually see that the problem is their bloc.
Absolutely right. I mean, the European Union is hundreds of millions of people in population, so many different countries, so many different territories. It's almost impossible for them to roll out a uniform system of vaccination. What they should have done is said, look, this is something best handled at the nation state level, because you've got huge countries like Germany with a population of 80 million, and then right down countries like Austria with a population of 6 million. With, you know, Austria's covered in mountains, Germany's relatively flat. It's far more difficult to deal with these different countries because they are so unique. And this is why supranational models of government like the European Union do not work, because they cannot adapt and cannot relate to individual circumstances in individual countries. It's like the old Soviet Union applying one model to all when they're so diverse, it just can't work.
Well, exactly. And I'm told that one of the reasons that they were so slow in getting the vaccinations organised was partly because of their over-regulated market system, and partly also because they were concentrating on the price of the vaccine rather than actually getting it to people.
Well, again, Mike, it was ever thus. I mean, we had the debacle a few weeks ago of the French shutting their borders to their own lorry drivers that were stuck in the UK. It just shows you what the European Union is like. And you're absolutely right. Their over-regulated, over-costed system of doing things is delaying the safety and well-being of citizens of the European Union. And I hope that citizens in those countries will wake up and smell the coffee on this and realise that actually outside of this bloc, which is operating in its own interest, not concerned about the health of the population, it's concerned about the European Union showing face and looking good, because they've had an appalling record on delivering the vaccine to their populations. And so this is really just demonstrating to leavers what we already knew, and to remainers in this country who are still fighting and want to go take us back, that actually we're better being in command of our own destiny and in control of our own vaccine program.
Absolutely. And also how arrogant of them as a group of individuals who are never elected to any job at all, these commissioners, right? Starting to dictate to companies companies, multinational companies, no less. I mean, what sort of a message does that send to any company that might want to settle itself inside of the EU? Oh, sorry, you can't. Well, if you want to come and have a company in the EU, we'll be the ones telling you what you'll be able to do and what you won't be able to do.
Well, quite right. I'm sure this health commissioner is a very lovely lady, but I hadn't heard of her till this morning.
No.
And now all of a sudden she's got this massive power to determine who gets vaccinated and who doesn't, yet she's not had a single vote cast in her name. At least over here, if we don't like our government, we can remove them. But over there, the poor people of Europe are stuck with these incompetent people. And you're absolutely right. What message does it send to international business, to investors and to competitors that in the middle of a crisis, which the whole world is engulfed in, although I'm opposed to lockdowns, the virus is a real thing and we've got to combat it. What message does it send to the world that the European Union's immediate instinct is protectionism? It's build walls, it's put restrictions on, when we should all be cooperating together, whether you're inside the EU or outside the EU. And they've really shown their true colours on this.
They really have, because it looks petulant, it looks petty, and it looks pathetic. You know, 3 Ps to the EU, as far as I'm concerned, because in the end, you know, I'm not even sure that they've got the power to control multinational companies in this way. I mean, what if Pfizer just said, well, I'll tell you what, if that's the way you want to play it, we'll just leave the EU altogether and we'll go and set up shop in Britain?
Well, I think that's quite right. And of course, President Macron this year is facing a difficult set of elections in France. And the French have got one of the poorest levels of vaccination. And I'm pretty sure that within a few weeks, or probably even today, the palace in Paris, where the president lives, is raging because he wants to vaccinate his population, yet he's being told from someone who is above him that he can't. Similarly, Chancellor Merkel is facing problems in Germany, growing discontent at the lockdown measures, and she needs to get her population vaccinated. Are these big, powerful countries, France and Germany, going to sit by and allow some piddly little commissioner in Brussels to dictate to them when they can get their vaccine rolled out? I think it's extraordinary.
And things are looking a bit dicey over in Amsterdam and Holland as well, aren't they? There's riots sort of spreading from city to city, anti-lockdown riots. They put a curfew on. The authorities are spraying people with water cannon. You know, Europe doesn't look like a very sort of solidly peaceful place at the moment.
No, quite right. And there have been some very alarming videos going around on social media over the weekend and yesterday. I think it's in Holland, of policemen aggressively hitting young people sitting down in parks with batons. I mean, this is a real issue for those of us that believe in liberty and freedom and civil rights, that across not just Europe, but we've had examples of it here, perhaps not to that level of aggression. And there's also been examples in the United States of the authorities clamping down on individuals' right to protest, an individual's right to object, and as you guys have experienced at Talk Radio, an individual right to have an opinion. A combination of big government and big tech is not really one that's satisfactory for the future. And we need, as a society, I think, to seriously examine the powers of the state, the powers of big tech, and establish new norms for how we can all engage as free citizens in the future. Yeah,
and it's very interesting as well, since this story has obviously exploded across our media this morning, the EU are kind of backpedaling a bit. They put up some Irish MEP that I heard on a radio station earlier today, talking about how, oh, these are just negotiations and this is just the normal practice of making sure that, you know, the company fulfills its contract, blah, 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 blah. Well, actually, no, this is the way that protection rackets operate. You threaten people with something so that they do what you want.
Yeah, well, we should perhaps rename her the Don or something, this health commissioner. We'll wake up with, it won't be a horse's head, it'll be a sort of empty needle in the bed
That's
next
right.
morning.
Yeah, but it is extraordinary, isn't it?
It is absolutely extraordinary. And I think really what this is, it's a bunker mentality. The European Union, as a collective, have abject failed in rolling out the vaccine across the EU member states. You've got small countries like Israel, you've got us in Britain, the United States, all pulling ahead, getting our populations vaccinated. And this is basically EU trying to blame other people because they have failed, which is what they always do. It's never the fault of the European Union that we have a migration crisis in Europe. It's never the fault of the European Union that the southern states of the EU are poorer because of the imposition of the euro. It's not the European Union's fault that Britain had enough and voted to leave. They're never prepared to take responsibility. And really, at some point, they're going to have to. because the citizens of Europe have suffered just as much as we have with lockdowns and their economies, and they're going to need to recover. And if the EU continue to delay the rollout of the vaccine, the longer it's going to take to get the economies of Europe back up and running. So there are some serious issues here, and the EU's got a lot of questions to answer.
Exactly right. And I mean, as far, I'm not expecting you to be knowledgeable of international law in all areas, but I mean, I'm not even sure that this question of telling Pfizer that you'll need to get permission effectively before you can export anything, I'm not sure there's any legal grounds for that.
I can't imagine there would be. I mean, they are supplying this vaccine, not just to the European Union, but essentially to the whole world. And I don't think the whole world will simply stand by and say, OK, European Union, you can impose these rules and regulations on this company to the detriment, not just of Britain, but to the rest of the world. I can't see that happening. I can't see President Biden, who's got a plan to vaccinate 100 million Americans within 100 days, sitting by and allowing that to happen. Right. And hopefully, in the course of international relations, this will demonstrate to the Americans that their true friends in Europe are, in fact, the British and not necessarily the European Union.
No. Well, the European Union, who clearly will have to now look at all of the various different countries, as you said, which all have very different needs, very different populations, very different just geographies, apart from anything else, never mind different languages and all the rest of it, and different health systems. You know, they're going to have to work out, presumably, in their tiny minds, exactly which order people should be getting the vaccines in, because in this country we only have to worry about the order of people getting it, i.e. individuals, vulnerable people, the elderly, people working in social care, people working in healthcare, people working on the front lines of dealing with the public. They're going to have to presumably work out some kind of very complicated matrix which says, should the people of Italy get it before the people of Croatia? You know, should Spain get more than France does? I mean, it's a nightmare for them.
It is. And of course, they're having to deal with, you know, situations where you've got islands as small as the little Greek islands to the high Alps of Austria and northern Italy, the much older populations in northern Europe compared to southern Europe. It's a right old mess. And for the European Union, instead of being flexible opening and saying, just get the damn thing out there and vaccinate people, their initial reaction is procedure, it's committees, it's regulations, it's making sure the Commission looks good. And really, as I say, I think it's going to become quite a political issue, particularly in those countries that have got elections this year and whose economies have taken quite a battering, just as ours have. I can't see this existing model of the European Union lasting much longer. It's been in trouble for some time. There's been a great gap between the southern states and the northern states in the European Union. And this COVID crisis, if the populations aren't vaccinated, but the rest of the world manages to move ahead, I think the citizens of the European Union will be up in arms at the failed rollout of this vaccine.
Can you imagine as well, Brendan, if it was the other way around and say the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was being offered to countries around the world, or indeed in Europe, as it has been, and Britain and the British government said, no, you can't send it anywhere else until you've asked our permission?
Oh, we wouldn't hear the end of it. I mean, the wokerati and the Twitterati.
I like that, the wokerati.
Yeah, it's good, isn't it?
I like that.
They would be up in arms. Yeah, you go. I might put a what's it on that? You know, that thing where you can't sell it on.
Oh, what, an EU export ban?
I'm going to get one of them. No, I mean, they would literally be up in arms. Yeah, over here, all those people that were previously great supporters of the European Union, while they've observed what's gone on, they're not exactly being critical. But if we did it, we'd be imperialists, we'd be racist, we'd be nationalists, and we wouldn't hear the end of it. Unfortunately, what this has realised to all of us is actually Britain's far better off outside. We're doing our bit, not just to vaccinate our population here in the UK, but we're also helping developing countries and the dependent territories as well, while the European Union is sitting there fat and bloated and not meeting the international standards that we expect of Western democratic countries looking after their citizens.
Absolutely right. Brendan, while I've got you on, let me just ask you about the school situation, because obviously you're active down there in Ashford in Kent. Kent, one of the places that suffered at the hands of the lockdown back in sort of November time, when you suddenly went from tier 1 to tier 3, or tier 4 rather. What's the view down there in your part of the world about reopening the schools?
Well, I think we need to get schools reopened as soon as possible. Children have suffered this year in the UK. I think it's 700 million hours have been lost in total for children in schools. Home parenting is a great challenge for those parents who've got to work at the same time as trying to educate their children. And as I think I've discussed on your show previously, when you've got tight, cramped conditions with lots of families and lots of children, it's impossible to learn. They're not getting the education they need. So I think absolutely right. Let's get our children vaccinated if we can, and the teachers. Let's get schools open. I don't see why every school nurse couldn't be responsible for vaccinating the children in the school and getting it done nice and quickly. Most schools have got a school nurse. We need to get them back. Otherwise, I don't want to be crass about this. We will end up with a generation of delinquents that are behind, that are not able to catch up. And that's not going to help us long term make a success of this country. So get the schools open.
Yes, Brendan, very well said. Couldn't agree more with you. Thank you very much indeed. Brendan Chilton, CEO of the Independent Business Network there, talking absolute sense, not only about the European Union, but also about the schools. There is now growing pressure on the government to reopen the schools of this country, not least because of the depression, a wave of which is sweeping through our young people, not least because of the crime rates which are going up, because so many young people now are so frustrated by the lockdown that they're taking it out on their fellow citizens. There's so many reasons why we need to find a roadmap out of this particular situation. We've been saying it here at Talk Radio for many weeks. It now looks as though all of the things that we have been saying are being taken up by the government because they realise in and of themselves that they cannot keep this going indefinitely, that of course it has to be done in a safe way. But if we have the vaccinations and if we have the ability to make sure that people can be safer, then what on earth is the reason that we cannot reopen the schools and we cannot lift some of the restrictions in place while keeping others which are important to keep? It makes perfect sense to me, and it doesn't mean that you have to completely sell the farm. It doesn't mean that you let rip with the virus. It doesn't mean any of those things. What it does mean is that we actually take a sensible approach, a grown-up approach, one which safeguards not only the health of the nation, but the mental health of our children.